People tend to think widely held beliefs aren't false or misleading. Though there's much to this, it's a rule with clear exceptions. Just to take one, for most of human history, people believe the sun moves around the earth. We still speak this way, even though science has shown us it's false. It's the earth that moves relative to the sun. Another misbelief. Fact and value statements are radically different. Fact statements we believe are objectively true or false. Value statements wholly subjective again. Take this statement, or this statement, or this one. They're all factual statements. They're claims about how the world is objectively, having so-called cognitive meaning. That is, they're true or false because we can both rationally discuss and settle them by using ordinary evidence-based reasoning. It might not always be possible to settle them that way here and now, but every factual claim can be, in principle at least. Take this claim again, or this one, or this. These are value statements. They're not about how the world is objectively. We can't really rationally discuss or settle them with empirical investigation, evidence. They're cognitively meaningless, not true or false. When it comes to aesthetic and religious belief, we feel we need to agree to disagree. Be tolerant instead. Why rock the boat, right? First of all, to say fact statements are either true or false is to invoke values. Yes, truth is a value, and so statements where it's involved are value statements in this minimal sense at least. Evidence is a value too. If someone doesn't value evidence, what evidence can you possibly give to show they should value it? Without values, there would be no describing the world rightly or wrongly. We would have no conception of a world to begin with. This might be written off as stage setting though. All of this must be in place? Sure, but once it is, the fact-value dichotomy still holds. To go back to our examples from before, these statements are still about how the world is objectively and so have cognitive meaning. There's a fact of the matter as to whether snow is white. That horse has 4 legs. There are more than 5 planets in the solar system, and so on. These statements aren't and so can't be rationally discussed and settled again. There's no fact of the matter as to whether Pepsi tastes better than Coke, accordion music is bad music, and so on. As philosophers have said, the former statement class correspond to real-world things or states of affairs. The latter doesn't. That's why fact statements are objectively true or false, and value statements aren't. What about these statements though? They're both fact and value statements. Arguably, there's a fact of the matter as to whether someone was a cruel emperor, say, or a bad person, or someone murdered someone else. Yet the statements have value words in them. We can't really replace them with purely factual words with the same extension either, it seems. Again, the fact-value dichotomy turns out to be false. Hilary Putnam's work is key here. Above all, in these 6 books, he makes the case for statements being both evaluational and about how the world is, that fact statements are value involving in a minimal sense at least. As he also shows, the criterion of cognitive meaning used to set up the fact-value dichotomy is self-refuting actually. For if I say something like this, I've made a statement that's cognitively meaningless by its own lights. For this criterion itself isn't a fact statement that can be objectively true or false. This reduction argument plus the arguments from mixed statements and truth as value are valid and sound. It means the fact-value dichotomy is false both in theory and in practice. From this, we can go on to derive the following theorem in quotation marks. PET is short for Putnam's entanglement theorem. Its biggest impact is on ethics and science, and not just on human and social sciences like philosophy or economics, but the natural sciences. On the face of it, they're all statement systems of a certain complexity. No science is value-free or can be modeled purely algorithmically, it seems. Science without values is blind. Ethics without facts is empty. The ramifications of PET are arguably huge. Putnam infers a wholesale fact-value entanglement from the dichotomy's collapse, though. It doesn't follow. We've only shown some statements or uses are mixed or entangled here. Fact and value statements might still be almost always different, more often than not anyway. It isn't necessarily true we can't distinguish between fact and value words either. Snow, horse, and planet are good cases of fact words, whereas cruel, murder, and bad are good cases of value words again. That description presupposes valuing is still about stage setting and so can be bracketed here, which is why the kind of wholesale fact-value entanglement he derives is as invalid and unsound as the stark dichotomy he criticizes. Putnam makes a good case for why the dichotomy has been harmful, though. His crown example is a quote from this economist. Given that value judgments are subjective, if we disagree here, it's a case of live and let live or thy blood or mine, and this according to the importance of the difference or the relative strength of our opponents. Robbins himself used this dichotomy to argue against income redistribution during the Great Depression. That value statements about ends can't be rationally discussed is part of neoliberal economics. It's affected the lives of billions through seeping into government policy, trade agreements, and so on. As Putnam has already shown, it's based on a false fact-value dichotomy. Economics does contain mixed statements. Instead of pretending it's a value-free science, it should deal with value statements and value conflicts head-on. Problem is, Putnam's own version of the entanglement thesis is equally invalid and unsound, and arguably just as harmful. For what happens if we can draw any clear distinction between fact and value statements? Statements like this and that one are now basically on par with this and that one. Worst case scenario, objective truth drops out of the picture completely. Ordinary evidence-based reasoning too. And so we're back to the live and let live and thy blood or mine scenario from before. He himself argues for more than tolerating religion, say. He thinks we should value different points of view because they're different. That's all well and good, but what do we do when celebrating differences isn't working anymore? When we're confronted with opponents who make zero-sum supremacist claims like these, who are more than happy to use violence to force them on others too. There's a middle way. To steer a path between stark dichotomy and all the way down entanglement, we need to do three things basically. Defend objective truth, meaning content. Not abandon ordinary evidence-based reasoning. Separate between different kinds of value statements more clearly. Take these value judgments again. They all contain value words. Only the first two statements can be settled using ordinary evidence-based reasoning though. The third can be settled in this way statistically across worldviews at least. The fourth can never be settled this way, for we can never find out if a God died for our sins in any natural way. Sin is a world-transcending term too. So, the first two statements have real epistemic worth, the third minimal worth, and the fourth no epistemic worth again. Which is why they're capable of being objectively true, while the fourth statement is at most subjectively true again. This stuff is pretty involved. Much of the philosophical discussion so far, frankly, hasn't been well framed. Just a few remarks for now. A statement having objective worldly content comes down to its key terms having real-world extension. Real-world things or states of affairs don't need to uniquely determine the use of value words and so value statements here. They only need to constrain it. Take this statement again. It has a value word in it and so is classed as a value statement. There's nothing in the world uniquely corresponding to it, unlike the word or phrase the planet Jupiter, say. It doesn't mean murder has no objective meaning content, though. That the statement Jack murdered John can't be objectively true. The statement can still be linked to something in the world constraining it that we can all perceive. This is pretty straightforward, at least. If someone waits for someone in hiding with an axe, say, and then cuts off that someone's head with that axe, that's murder. That's why this statement can be objectively true too. Take this statement again. There's nothing in the world corresponding to or constraining the concept sin. It has no objective perceptual meaning content at all. That's why it can be at most subjectively true. Which means this statement can't be objectively true again. There's no room for rational conviction or even reasonable persuasion in the last statement class. Those who don't agree this or that statement is true can at best show forbearance here, or their resistance can be overcome by the belief holder using coercion, violence, which explains why the history of Christianity has been so bloody. Value statements like this, being objectively true, is part of a functioning justice system, say. Religious or ideological value statements like these aren't. To put all value statements on par is harmful to the common welfare, like Putnam is arguably doing by not defending the key role of ordinary evidence-based reasoning in all this. In a democracy, ideological and religious value statements or beliefs should be kept from the public sphere as much as possible. It should be based maximally on statements of the former kind instead, if we value peaceful coexistence and progress, that is, for they at least can be debated and settled in common. Those interested in diving in should begin by looking up the 6 books by Putnam I spoke of. These articles and books are also helpful, or wait till my History of Philosophy book comes out.